Hello and a very warm welcome. You're watching the Wire Wrap. I'm Sravasti Dasgupta. There were communal tensions and violence in Maharashtra's Nagpur earlier this week after tensions escalated over protests demanding the removal of Mughal Emperor Aurangazeb's tomb. This led to tensions escalating, and there were also rumors of the desecration of a holy cloth. There was violence, arson, stone pelting. Policemen were injured, and this has led to communal tensions rising in the area amid increasing demands for the removal of Aurangzeb's tomb over there. In addition, clashes also took place when Holi was celebrated last week in various places, including in West Bengal's Birbhum district, as well as areas in Jharkhand's Giridih district as well. And on the other hand, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has addressed the Lok Sabha on the success of the Maha Kumbh, but he has not made any mention of the stampede or the deaths that took place during the Maha Kumbh. Joining me to discuss all this and more is Ajoy Ashirwad. He's political editor at the Wire and Kunal Purohit. He's an independent journalist and he's also an author, and you might have seen his recent book on the stands. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's get started with the violence in Nagpur. Just to tell our viewers, as we were just mentioning, that there were protests and increasing calls for the removal of Aurangzeb's tomb in Nagpur. And after the protests were held by Hindutva groups including Bajrang Dal and VHP, there were rumors that the Kalma had been burnt in the area, and this led to violence, arson. And now remember, Nagpur is also the constituency of Chief Minister Devendra Fadnavis, who also holds the portfolio of Home. And it is also the headquarters of the RSS, which is the parent organization of the BJP. Now, we also saw in the run-up to this event that the Chief Minister, as well as other state ministers like Nitish Rane, political leaders like Abu Azmi, making very insightful statements. Now, I want to come to you, Kunal, because you've tracked how Hindutva really spreads and the rise of it in popular culture, and your book is also on this. Now, calls for removal of Aurangzeb's tomb is not new. As far as we know, that every time, whether it's Ram Navami or Shambhaji or Shivaji festival, these calls come up time and again. But this time we saw that Devendra Fadnavis in the assembly saying, attributing the violence to the movie Chhaava. Now, this is very strange because just a few weeks or days before that, the entire BJP dispensation, the government, they were pushing this movie, and now they're saying that passions were incited because of this movie, and they're attributing the violence and increasing passions to this. So how do you see the role of this movie? Is it a factor really?
Well, I mean, it's a very unwitting sort of acceptance of what the movie's really done. The truth is that the issue has always been alive in Maharashtra, right? And then we can go back in time to Bal Thackeray when he was alive, and when the Shiv Sena wanted to expand from Mumbai, which was really its home base, to cities like Aurangabad. And when the Shiv Sena tried to do that, Bal Thackeray found it extremely useful to use Aurangzeb's tomb as a very key issue, right? To be able to incite the Hindus and mobilize, and mobilize them towards his party. So the issue has been there, and I think we should be clear about it. What has happened, of course, is that while the issue was dormant for all of these years, there has been a very careful sort of cultivation of issues as emotive as this, or of trying to play up the image of Shivaji as a Hindu king alone, not someone who was egalitarian, but as someone who prioritized Hindu, and the words that they keep using is Hinduvi Swaraj. That's been the attempt of the RSS, of the BJP, and of all of the various organizations that have come to be born in Maharashtra just in the last few years. So there's been a concerted attempt to do this. What happened in this context is that once the attempt was made by different groups, then came a film as powerful as Chhaava, which essentially banked upon that already dormant appeal that was there and incited people's anger and emotions towards the cause. We've all seen so many videos that have come out on our social media platforms where people are crying at the end of the film. They're chanting slogans. They're wanting retribution for everything that Sambhaji faced. And I think it's just really the perfect storm here, where you have active mobilization by Hindu right-wing groups, and then comes pop culture, which only exacerbates all of the mobilization that has been done. It must also be added here that Devendra Fadnavis is being rather sort of coy about the fact that his party, his co-ministers, and people in the Sangh Parivar have been very actively flagging this issue. So the issue might have sort of been a result of the film in some ways, but let's not forget that the BJP has been very actively stoking the issue, and in fact just a couple of years ago, Devendra Fadnavis, when he was the deputy chief minister and he was not the chief minister under Eknath Shinde, there were a number of instances, Sravasti, where kids who were teenagers and so on, had started putting up posters or WhatsApp stories and so on of Aurangazeb and hailing Aurangazeb. So the Maharashtra government under Fadnavis filed FIRs against all of these kids just for praising Aurangazeb on social media platforms, and there were tensions in various parts of Maharashtra. And at that point, Fadnavis said, these are all Aurangzeb ki aulade. So, his language has been leading up to this moment. So my simple point is, yes, of course, Chhaava has incited all of these passions, but it's also coming on the banks of very, very active mobilization by the BJP, by various other, Hindutva groups in the state.
But I also want to ask you and Ajoy this, that the fact that, we've seen a slew of movies like this, which plays into popular sentiments, and there's no other way to put it, but the sentiments that the BJP wants to instigate. So Chhaava is just another movie in that whole spate of movies. But how has this turned into violence in this case, but not so much in other cases? We've seen, like, for instance, even Kashmir Files last year, we saw it was a huge hit and people were screaming and shouting in the theatres, and it also became a very big emotive issue, but not necessarily resulting in the kind of violence that we've seen.
Yeah. So, Sravasti, the BJP ever since, BJP under Modi, ever since it has come to power, this BJP has been using mass media as a very effective tool to kind of propagate its own ideological stances, and one of which has been to kind of rewrite history, which we saw during Atal Bihari Vajpayee's time also, and that's been a long RSS project. But it has used Kerala Story or Kashmir Files, and it is constantly kind of promoting those kind of movies. But Chhaava, I make a distinction here because Chhaava was actually adapted from a novel. I haven't read the novel, nor have I seen the film. But even if it has been adapted, so the BJP has been at the forefront of kind of demonizing Aurangzeb even more, or bringing that historical debate of whether Aurangzeb was good or bad, or can he be seen as a ruler, or should he be seen as only a Muslim ruler who demolished temples. So Chhaava has given them an opportunity to kind of bring that debate, which has been kind of resolved in the discipline of history, and make it contemporary and make it political for their own gains right now. So, and I have actually no hesitation to say that despite ever since Chhaava has released, it has led to different kinds of outbursts from the Hindu, emotional outbursts from the Hindutva groups. VHP and Bajrang Dal, they've been launching protests, and they've been talking about removing Aurangzeb's tomb in Aurangabad, which is now Sambhaji Nagar. But my thing is that Devendra Fadnavis, who is the chief minister right now, had absolutely no qualms about supporting these demands. On March 10th, Devendra Fadnavis comes out and says that he feels that Aurangzeb's tomb should be removed. And just 2 days ago, he made a statement saying that it's rather unfortunate that the government has to protect Aurangzeb's tomb. So he's not indirectly, but he's directly fueling these passions on the streets, where they're and creating an environment with a lot of potential for communal violence. So, and he's the chief minister, he's the home minister, and he knows that these kind of the passions are high. Instead of containing them, he is actually trying to foment them. So, and in other states, we see BJP kind of gunning down on even social media's post and arresting people when they kind of, for their small social media posts, which may or may not be kind of that inflammatory. But the governments in UP led by Adityanath, or in Madhya Pradesh led by Mohan Yadav, and in so many instances I can cite right now where BJP governments have kind of suppressed any form of social media post in the name of preventing communal violence. But here is one government which is making an exception. Devendra Fadnavis is trying not just to kind of promote these emotional outbursts on the streets by groups like VHP and Bajrang Dal, but also aiding and abetting these passions by his own statements. So here I think we should be very clear that we should hold none other than the Chief Minister himself for the communal violence, and it's high time that all these governments who are now what Devendra Fadnavis is doing. Devendra Fadnavis, after fomenting this kind of politically and communally charged environment, is now talking about the communal violence as only a law and order problem. So who is responsible for law and order problem? Shouldn't you be the person who should have prevented this kind of environment? This is my question to him. But these guys are going on and it seems like even after the violent incidents took place in Nagpur, he is still kind of making those kind of statements which has the potential to kind of spread even more. And as a Home Minister, for me, and also the Chief Minister, it's utter failure of Devendra Fadnavis.
Yeah, so I just want to come on this, the fact that we have seen strong remarks by Maharashtra leaders, like you were just mentioning. Yes. Fadnavis has gone out himself and he said that his hands are tied, that the tomb of Aurangazeb, he cannot remove it. But on the other hand, he has said that Chhaava has shown the reality of Sambhaji, but what really comes down to is the inflammatory speeches. I just want to refer to what Nitish Rane has said. He said that while the government will do its job, Hindutva organizations should do their jobs. After all, when Babri Masjid was demolished, we did not sit and discuss with each other. Our Karsevaks did what was appropriate. So this is a clear statement where he's directing people. Then we have Abu Azmi, then we have Fadnavis himself, and now Fadnavis is saying that this was a pre-planned violence. So pre-planned by whom?
I mean, the other thing is, one more thing that has happened is in the same context is with Eknath Shinde. And he's made a statement saying that what the Maharashtra government should do with Aurangzeb's tomb is exactly what the US did with Osama bin Laden's body, which is to bury it at sea so that it doesn't pollute Maharashtra's land. So these are all, Sravasti, indicators and egging on people into acting in a certain direction. I will not be surprised, unfortunately, if in today's climate in Maharashtra, that some statements like these do actually end up, leading to violence at the memorial itself. Because you see, some of the most powerful politicians in the state have all been saying the same thing, right? They've all expressed their support for the memorial and for the tomb to not be there. So unfortunately, this is you said who's planned it. And I think one answer is definitely to look at how the BJP and how all of its affiliated Hindutva groups have been leading up to this moment. The other thing also I think important is to zoom out a bit, right, and understand what context is this happening in Maharashtra. Maharashtra now is emerging as the country's communal tinderbox in so many ways. It is where some of the most inflammatory speeches happen. It is where some of the most egregious hate speeches are taking place. And a few days ago there was a report that came out by the India Hate Lab, which said that 18% of all hate speeches in India took place in Maharashtra last year, right? So you imagine that this is the country's most industrialized, the country's most its richest, its most urbanized state, and this is the politics that we're now seeing. And this is not just last year, this has been the case for a few years because I've been tracking things on the ground. So what you're essentially seeing is that there has been this active mobilization by all of these Hindutva groups. And unfortunately now it's reached a point where people have been so radicalized on the ground that we are now increasingly seeing instances where common people who are not affiliated to any of these groups are now standing up and taking matters in their own hands, right? So just a few weeks ago, we saw a small Gram Panchayat in Maharashtra coming up with a resolution saying that it's not going to allow Muslims to put up stalls in a temple fair. And then this has been a tradition for now years and years. So suddenly the Gram Panchayat is passing a resolution like this. a few weeks ago, a few months ago, we saw, a bunch of Hindu men who were appearing for examinations to become policemen, assaulting a Muslim man in a moving train just because they thought he had slaughtered a cow and he was carrying beef. Again, these are not people who are associated with Hindutva groups, right? At least on the evidence that we have. But what we are seeing is, because there's been such a strong mobilization by all of these groups for a number of years, we're going to see more and more of these instances now happening in Maharashtra. And the idea is to change the social fabric of Maharashtra and make it another Hindutva laboratory like Gujarat, like UP, like MP, and now Maharashtra.
And it's also interesting, as you were mentioning earlier, that Bal Thackeray had also been part of this project of making Aurangazeb a rallying point. And now we have the Shiv Sena, Aditya Thackeray and others saying that Fadnavis is, and the BJP is responsible for inciting passions. It's a long-term game, as you're saying. It's not just happened in the last few months or weeks. So, I mean, just to take a step further, that because Kunal was giving us a zooming out picture, that if the government wants, the BJP is in power in the state as well as in the union, double engine government. So if they want to put an end to this, what is stopping them from removing the tomb of Aurangzeb? It's been 350 years. I mean, and it's just like a small patch of a tomb, right? It's not even some elaborate arrangement. They can remove it in the interest of national security and all of that. But what's stopping them?
So with all the evidence that we have over the last few years, it points to the fact that BJP may not be wanting to kind of stop these kind of events, because they also kind of, every time we see, for example, like you live in Maharashtra, I see the whole incident from Delhi, and just a few weeks before, we were seeing a lot of people kind of criticizing the newly elected Devendra Fadnavis government for not keeping his poll promises, and there was some kind of anger brewing up on the ground that this Ladki Bahin or other kind of the people promises made to the farmers are not being kept, and Devendra Fadnavis has been coming to and making statements that we need to kind of sort out our financial situation before we can fulfill the poll promises.
And Munde's resignation.
And many of those things. And suddenly Nagpur violence has given them an opportunity not just to kind of deflect attention from these issues, but also consolidate ground on Hindutva ideology. Right. So, and this is not just a Maharashtra specific incident. These kind of what Kunal was right now talking about, all these kind of incidents fall in a series of such incidents. We saw last year in Kanwar Yatra, we saw a lot of Hindutva groups talking about how they should not be buying anything from Muslim shops, and the idea that Muslims should be boycotted from Hindu festivals has kind of suddenly taken a lot of shape, and you saw that people demanding that every Muslim shop should name themselves whether it's a Muslim shop or not. And then in Holi, we saw BJP MLAs from Bihar and in Uttar Pradesh, and also a deputy superintendent of police making these kind of comments that people, if you don't want to, if Muslims don't want to be unwillingly smeared with colors, they should stay home. So it's an indirect threat, right? And in Madhya Pradesh, similar, when you see India winning the Champions Trophy, the Hindutva groups taking out a march in front of masjids and deliberately stoking them, deliberately provoking them to kind of respond. And right now, when possibly a few Muslim residents of Nagpur may have responded to this kind of provocation, it is being made out to be a law and order problem, devoid and alienated from the political environment and a communally charged environment that BJP itself has fomented. So this is the problem, that we cannot treat communal incidents as mere law and order problem, and especially when sitting representatives, elected representatives, government officials are hand in gloves in trying to kind of spread an environment of communal hate and blatant Hindu majoritarianism. So when this is the situation, we need to kind of analyze all these kind of things. So in Maharashtra, you were talking about, there are many academic works also, one of which I remember right now is Jayant Lele, where when you're talking about Bal Thackeray, where these kind of majoritarian tendencies or Marathi chauvinism or Hindutva chauvinism is kind of emerging as political trends when in the midst of like brooding or a booming agrarian crisis in rural Maharashtra and cities consolidating as major centers of work, mostly leading to informal labor. And this is where an economic crisis is being kind of everywhere, is being kind of used by majoritarian groups to consolidate their presence and kind of spread further anxieties, and most of which is targeted against minorities. It may be UP Bihari Bhaiya in the case of Marathi chauvinism. In case of Hindu majoritarianism, it is anti-Muslim hate. So this is what the BJP has been doing, and it's high time, I think, people need to kind of realize it, what is their game plan.
Right, and because you were...
I just want to quickly add, I think what Ajoy is saying is so critical and is underlined by, by a data point that has really shaken me. And I keep thinking about it, which is again from the same report, right? From the same India Hate Lab report, which is that the 5 biggest, sort of sources of hate speech last year, who did they include? Number 1, Yogi Adityanath, right? Number 2, the Prime Minister of India. Number 3, the Home Minister of India. Number 4, the Assam Chief Minister. And number 5 is another BJP leader from Hyderabad, T. Raja Singh. These are all constitutionally mandated positions that all of these 5 gentlemen are occupying. And if you have the country's topmost political leaders engaging in hate speech, that right there itself is then keeping the field open for all of these kinds of mobilizations, because the bar for what is normal is lower to such an extent that all of these Hindutva groups and everyone else who wants to has a field day trying to then, fit in whatever agendas they might. So I think, Ajoy is right, the conditions have been created for all of this to happen.
No, some 20 years ago, these kind of radical, you could have blamed it on fringe Hindutva elements, okay, some radicalized you did this. But right now, in the last 5 years, elected MPs, MLAs, government officials have been talking in a way which will make the minority community even more insecure, even if it is not direct hate. They're making those kind of statements which reeks of Hindu majoritarianism.
So, and that brings me to what I wanted to discuss next, which is the celebrations around Holi. Now, Holi was celebrated late last week, and we saw tensions escalating around the celebration of Holi. Now, violent clashes took place in Jharkhand's Giridih when a procession was passing from in front of a mosque playing very loud music. Now, there was also violence reported in West Bengal's Birbhum district. In addition, we saw in Uttar Pradesh, mosques were covered in tarpaulin in many areas. And now the reason given was to protect the mosques from color being thrown at them. But we saw videos, for instance, in Uttar Pradesh, Sambhal, which has been tense for the last few months, that huge processions of people playing Holi right in front of the mosque and playing very loud music. Now, important to note is that this year Holi was on the same day as Jummah. So, and that was again became a point of majoritarian, show of majoritarian strength, because we had Uttar Pradesh Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath very categorically speak in support of the police official that Ajoy was mentioning earlier, and calls were also made to Muslims that you go and do your Jummah prayers after 2 p.m. even though it's supposed to be before that, and if you have a problem with colors, don't leave your house, and all of that. But I want to ask you, Kunal, that we have seen that the fact that Holi has been associated with violence earlier as well, but those were not communal violence, in the sense that it was mostly associated with sexual harassment against women, caste-based violence. But in this year particularly, this particular communal turn that Holi has taken, is this unique to this year?
Also, there is some evidence in history that Holi has been sometimes associated with communal violence, just because of the sheer nature of the event, right? Which is essentially large groups of people being very, very boisterous sometimes being intoxicated and so on. So we've seen some of that, Sravasti, but I think what is now different with every Hindu festival is essentially that the nature of the festival has changed, right? From it being an occasion of celebration to it being an occasion of mobilization on the lines of Hindutva. So what we are now seeing is a template that is followed no matter what the festival is, which is that there are processions taken out every time. I mean, I come from Mumbai and I've lived all my life in Mumbai, but till a few years ago I had never seen a Ram Navami procession in Mumbai, right? And now what we're seeing, even in places like Mumbai, which have had no history, is the same thing, which is large groups of Hindus processioning together, passing through Muslim areas, passing through areas like madrasas and mosques, and then standing there and playing Hindutva pop music, sometimes chanting aggressive slogans and so on. So that essentially has become a template that is followed no matter what the occasion is, and we are now seeing that in Holi as well. Holi was not associated with processions being taken out. The idea of Holi was for you to celebrate it with people who you wanted to. But that has also now changed in this new India of ours. And essentially, some of the videos that I saw were also the same thing, right? Standing outside the mosque, I think also in Aligarh and in other places, playing music which is sometimes very, very provocative, very defamatory towards Muslims and so on, and then just waiting for a reaction. What Ajoy was saying in Nagpur is essentially the case everywhere, Sravasti, which is that the playbook is the same. That you go to these areas, you try and elicit a provocation or a reaction, and then that provocation then becomes the riot. The actions that precede the provocation or the actions that precede the reaction are never a cause of the riot. And my fear is that things like Nagpur are sometimes often selectively shown, which is that you only show that okay, these guys came in rioted. So what Fadnavis and the others are saying is that, oh, how did Muslims plan this and all of that? But what we are not being able to see is the provocation. So I think that even in Holi is something that I'm now increasingly seeing, which is the same template.
Here a little bit of this whole if you go by historical evidence, is from the Mughal times, from the times of Akbar, and these three festivals, Holi, Diwali and Eid, these kind of represented what India's syncretism, and or of Hindu-Muslim coexistence, and you can see it in ample evidence in Jahangir's miniature paintings, in different kinds of Mughal literature, state literature, which during Akbar or Shah Jahan's time, and even so these three festivals have been, despite even if we kind of assume for a moment that post-partition there were seeds of hate between Hindu and Muslim community, these three festivals were all remained like that. They were neighborhood festivals where Hindus and Muslims participated, and it's not just in big cities but also in villages. If you go across North India, where Hindu majoritarianism is currently is at its peak, so you can see like Hindus and Muslims celebrating these Holi, Diwali and Eid together. And so from Sangh Parivar did not in the beginning target these three festivals to kind of spread their Hindutva anti-Muslim hate. They targeted Ram Navami, for example. If you were talking about Jharkhand and Bengal, so the Ram Navami was the flashpoint where these kind of communally charged violent incidents happened. In southern India, they created this day called Hanuman Jayanti, where such things happened, where communal incidents took place in Karnataka, and those became. But what has happened in the last 4-5 years, that even these mainstream festivals which kind of represented India's secular culture, India's syncretic culture, or even like a culture of coexistence between different, they are now being targeted in a way which we have never seen before. So regarding Aurangazeb also, like the idea is like, why are we talking about Aurangazeb? The idea ever since like the Sangh Parivar's project has always been to kind of erase history and always create a glorious past of India, in which is like, for me, it's like very mind-numbing and very childish, because we see like even all countries like Germany, which has had very bad experiences with different political parties, they try and create museums to kind of for people who are currently living to understand that we have done these mistakes, we should not repeat it. So Aurangzeb for them also could have been an example, even if they consider Aurangzeb as a demon, that okay, we should not be like Aurangzeb, rather than calling like, okay, we should not have any kind of representation or of any, we should kind of erase him from the pages of history. So that is very kind of child here. So we should, in that way, we should not be having a partition museum in Amritsar also, which kind of reminds us that we should not go through that kind of communal violence. Jallianwala Bagh should not be remembered right now because it reminds us of British atrocities. So it's the idea is to learn from history and not to create not to move back to a situation where we deliberately, the state and is trying to deliberately make people forget about what had happened in the past, because history, and that's kind of a very childish project because history has its way to come back into people's lives all the time, rather than kind of creating an environment which kind of promotes love, which the government claims, or they are doing something which is impossible to achieve, and rather using those things to kind of consolidate their own presence on the ground.
Before we move on to our last topic, I want to ask you, Kunal, because you were mentioning about the playbook, and which Ajoy was also referring to about large processions going in front of mosques and playing very loud music, kind of in a provocatory manner and waiting for a provocation. How do you trace this? I mean, where do you see the starting point of this now? Because we've seen in Ram Navami, it became 2 years back when it happened in Delhi, Madhya Pradesh and other places. But because you've written about this, I want to ask you, where do you trace this to, that this kind of playbook that has become toolkit, as they call it now?
It's interesting, if you go back in history, there is evidence of Ram Navami and these processions outside mosques to be a recurring factor in some of the worst communal violence that has happened, even back in, say, the 19th century and so on. So we've seen evidence of that, right? What has essentially changed is the nature of the music that is being played. Earlier as well, in those processions, historically, there would be music that the Hindus would insist on playing outside a mosque, and sometimes that would lead into and Mahatma Gandhi's written about this as well. The music before the mosque violence was what it was called. So there's some historical evidence that this was the case. What has now happened is that they have been able to reconfigure that situation, use technological tools, use social media to be able to then sort of completely unleash everything that they can on that situation. And the example that I give you is that it's no longer now about the music, but it's about how provocative the words can be, right? And then that particular genre and that particular model of communalism, I would say has effectively started from somewhere around 2014-15 onwards, where we started seeing that there was now more and more state sanction for this to happen. And I've traveled to BJP ruled states, I've traveled to opposition ruled states, and cops would tell me there that we started seeing more and more Hindutva groups taking out these processions and now being very active in mobilizing people on those occasions, which earlier used to, for instance, in Jharkhand, where I extensively reported from, there used to be a culture of various akhadas coming together and organizing the Ram Navami procession in different parts of the city. Slowly, as soon as the BJP came to power in 2014, the akhadas started either getting sidelined or getting co-opted through the VHP and the Bajrang Dal, and they had started infiltrating those spaces, so they would then be the lead organizers, and they would often then play all of this music, right? So the nature of that changed as soon as they came into political power. And now the case is such that they've perfected the playbook, right, in so many different ways, to the extent that it's no longer now a rural phenomena, or it's no longer happening in distant parts of the country where nobody's watching. We've seen evidence of it happening in, as you said, Delhi. We've seen evidence of it in my city, in Mumbai, where exactly this same playbook is played over and over and over again, and it's being perfected every single time. By just the kind of words that they're using, just the kind of rhetoric that they can be using, and so on. And just before we go, the fact that we had to cover mosques because Hindus want to take out processions, let's just reflect on that for a minute, right? And what does that really tell you of not just the state of the country, but what our establishment and what our administration is inherently telling you? It's telling you that, here is a group of people, we don't know what they're going to do. We are not going to be able to control them. If assuming that they want to control them, we are not going to be able to control them. So what we will do is we will erase your existence temporarily, and we will pretend that there is no mosque here, right? So that these processions can then carry on.
And it's very interesting that you say this, because the erasing of the existence is what brings me to our final topic, which is the fact that Prime Minister Modi addressed the Lok Sabha earlier this week, and he spoke about the success of the Maha Kumbh. Now remember, 2 separate stampedes took place during the Maha Kumbh, and a total of at least 48 people died in these 2 separate stampedes. But in Modi's 13.5-minute speech, the stampedes were also not mentioned, the deaths were also not mentioned, as Kunal was mentioning, an erasure of the fact that these even took place. Ajoy, he spoke for 13.5 minutes but made no mention of these stampedes or the deaths. A deliberate move to laud the management, which was in effect the responsible for the stampede and the deaths, and not to mention it?
No, yeah. So, since we're talking about history and history writing, for me, Prime Minister Modi's speech was recording his own version of state history when he has been in power. It's not for the first time that he has not acknowledged these kind of mishaps during major events. This is one. We had seen it before also, where Manipur was not mentioned in his speech, or even when the opposition has been attacking on him on cronism, Adani, Ambani, he has not mentioned all of those things. So it's his way of putting on paper only those things which he would like to be remembered, and that's the state's version. So currently the state's version under Modi's regime of history is incomplete, is without facts, and it's mostly about glorifying his own presence, and that has been Mr. Modi's the main characteristic of Mr. Modi's tenure. The second thing is what kind of surprised me was while doing this, while kind of recording his own version of history, he went on to kind of equate Maha Kumbh with Dandi March, with Vivekanand. So which are like epochal events in our history. Dandi March, which is like which kind of consolidated Indian nationalist movement, consolidated Indian people to march against British, and it's quite a big event. Vivekanand's Chicago's address, it was a really big event with Maha Kumbh, which is not happening for the first time. It has been happening. It happened in 2013. It happened in 2019. But because it has now happened under Mr. Modi, he is equating it to these. So for me, my understanding is that he is demeaning the value of Vivekanand's address. He is demeaning what Dandi March stood for during the anti-nationalist movement. So it was quite flabbergasting. How can a prime minister who thinks of himself as a Vishwaguru can make these kind of false equivalences? He could have ideally, and it's not just Maha Kumbh. He did not just not talk about stampedes. He did not talk about how the UP chief minister who was overseeing was conducting himself at that point of time. He because we're talking about communal hate, there were so many incidents around Maha Kumbh where small BJP leaders talked about not buying anything from Muslims in Allahabad, and during that time I remember Adityanath addressing Muslims as Katmulla, because you were talking about music. So music and the kind of abusive words it has, this kind of, his book is on that. Here is one chief minister who is using those kind of words, which has happened in this Bhojpuri kind of hate music. So and I remember him talking about on some, I exactly don't remember, but he spoke of something like addressing Muslims ki unko apna ancestry yaad aa gaya hoga, referring to the fact that you were Hindus before. On some good gesture by Muslim community, this is how the UP chief minister responded. A good gesture from the Muslim community towards the Hindu community in an act of love, in an act of affection, and this is how Adityanath responds saying that unko apna purana ancestry yaad ho gaya hoga, reminding them in a way that you were Hindus before but you got converted to Islam. So this is how these people talk, and when your leaders talk like this, what would people learn from you? If they are, that's why we see impunity at all levels if you are a Hindutva activist.
Also, we saw that the fact that, as you were saying, that he did not mention and he's writing his own history, but the fact is that we did not see any pushback from the opposition parties. We saw one stray line from Rahul Gandhi saying that he should have at least offered his condolences. But I wonder, do you see the reason that political parties are wary of not saying anything negative about the Kumbh, because they don't want to alienate the Hindu vote bank, which is already being consolidated for all the reasons that we spoke about earlier? Do you think that is one of the reasons why they have shied away from speaking about it?
I mean, essentially, Sravasti, I think the political discourse of the country has now changed in a way that it's going to take maybe very, very long for it to then revert to what was the original discourse before 2014, right? Or what was the ordinary average discourse, which is that now you can no longer, do politics of secularism. I mean, I was talking to an opposition politician the other day, and he was saying that we are afraid to even utter the word Muslim now, right? Whenever we utter the word Muslim, it's always in conjunction with various other communities. Or we have, the amorphous term minorities. And I think that is the true impact of the BJP and the RSS's politics and its dominance over our political language and discourse over the last 10, 12 years. So what you're now essentially seeing is that they've set the rules and all of the other parties have to play by those rules that have been set. They do not have the courage of the conviction to be able to alter those rules anymore, right? They don't have the political heft that is needed to take on the language of bigotry and Hindutva that the BJP and the RSS have championed. But the one thing that I do want to say is, I was looking at some of the past Kumbh Mela stampedes that have happened, right? And the first after independence was the 1954 one, where 800 people died. The difference then and now was that the Prime Minister at that time, Nehru, came to Parliament, right, made a brief statement and asked everyone to observe a minute's silence as tribute to all of the people who had died, right. They even appointed a judicial commission, and there's a lot that is wrong with what Nehru did as well, because one of the reasons that people said the stampede happened was possibly because he was also around, and again, VIP arrangements and so on. But the point is that, we were living in a time when leaders were willing to take responsibility for the actions. Do we have our Prime Minister, taking responsibility for all the people who died after a very, very botched up demonetization exercise? Do we have, do we have the Prime Minister taking responsibility for announcing, a lockdown in 4 hours? And Rajdeep's book, in fact, Rajdeep Sardesai's book, has a very startling admission by the health minister at that point, Harshvardhan, who says that we were not consulted. We were not consulted before the lockdown was announced. It was the Prime Minister and his office who was basically doing the decision making. So if we can pin the responsibility of the decision on the Prime Minister's office and the Prime Minister, isn't it then fair to also ask him to take responsibility for all the suffering that people accepted? And so I think we've come to a point now, Sravasti, where political accountability is no longer, sadly, not just in the opposition parties, but also in us citizens. We don't ask for political accountability anymore.
And that's something to think about, viewers, the fact that Indians are dying and the people that we have elected are not even bothering to mention the fact that they have died. It's not there in parliamentary records for the subsequent years and few generations.
And maybe we don't even know the real numbers, right?
Still don't know the real numbers of exactly how many people have died, because the centre has told Parliament yesterday that they don't have a figure at all of the number of people who have died. Anyway, so we'll keep our eyes on all these developments. Thank you so much, Ajoy and Kunal, for joining us, and thank you to our viewers for watching.